A host of planned public-private sector projects are expected to create a minimum of 155,000 jobs in the next 5 years. They could attract investment of 840 billion rand, money we clearly need. Now, the first of the 43 projects are expected to get underway this year. In the pipeline are the expansion of a Beefmaster abattoir and the establishment of a local automotive parts manufacturer. Former Cabinet Minister Rolf Meyer is one of the brains behind the Public-Private Growth Initiative, and he joins us from our Pretoria studio. Very good to have you with us, Rolf Meyer. Obviously, I want to talk about your projects, but if you look at what's happening within the ANC, this is the decision-making body, one of the most powerful in the ANC. We're seeing growing divisions there. What sort of impact is that having on business?
I think it has a negative impact, undoubtedly so. But at the same time, you know, the question is how is going to be our response? And my view would be, I think private sector just has to come forward and do their thing and show trust and confidence in the future of the country. We can't be led in terms of our future only by the ANC and the way in which it is almost falling apart at the moment as far as the public image is concerned. So what we're trying to do is actually to build or rebuild a relationship between private sector and government. And we've seen successes around that in the last few months since this initiative came about a year ago. And I think we must just go ahead and do what is right in the interest of the country.
Mr. Meyer, Xoli here with Jane. Let's pick up on that issue of the relationship between government and business. It's been sometimes described as difficult and at times lacking in terms of trust. Talk to us about how you could describe the relationship right now in the Ramaphosa-led administration with business.
I think as we've just heard from the input that we all listened to, you know, South Africans have become much poorer in the last period of time. I would say particularly since 2015, and why I'm pointing that out is when Nhlanhla Nene was fired as Minister of Finance, there was a lot of confidence that went out of the country immediately that followed that incident. And now we have to rebuild. What we have sensed also was that there was a total lack of confidence between private sector and government. They were practically not really speaking to each other. And that is why this initiative came about, I would say a year ago, when we started to engage firstly with Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma as the Minister in the Presidency, then with President Ramaphosa, and what we have seen in the last 12 months is that there is a complete renewal of the building of trust. I would not say it's perfect yet, but I think many ministers, especially ministers in the economic cluster, have come forward, and there's a new re-engagement between the two sectors. At the same time, private sector had responded very favorably. Because I think they see now that the government is prepared to listen to them and prepared to engage. Over the weekend, I had reports back from certain sectors, in particular the ICT sector, which had engagements last week with the government department, relevant Department of Telecommunications. And they say it was a fantastic engagement, a constructive engagement that will take them forward in terms of their future plans combined as an ICT sector. So I think what we can see and what we observe at the moment is that this rebuilding of the relationship is in process, and it came about because of the need for private sector on the one side to engage and to commit themselves to growth and to create jobs, and on the other side, government to remove the inhibitors that prevent business from growing. And this relationship is starting to work very well.
Okay, let's talk about, if I may jump in here, one of the inhibitors. I mean, our economic outlook has moved from stable to negative. What are the ramifications of that as far as the public-private sector is concerned?
Yeah, you know, I guess the starting point of all inhibitors is the uncertainty about Eskom and the future of energy. But as we move forward, hopefully that will be addressed successfully. But there are other inhibitors as well. The one that comes to mind very often is, for instance, the e-visa issue with regard to tourism visas for the country, increasing our tourism potential. And that has now been successfully addressed, or at least started to be addressed. Certain announcements were made by the Minister recently as far as a new process of visa applications and e-visa installments. And so I think we can say that, you know, a number of these inhibitors are starting to get direct attention. But there are others, unfortunately, that still causes big problems in particular areas, and we have to work hard at that and ensuring that government is aware of what the causes and the results of these inhibitors are. On the other side, the private sector also play their bit in bringing them forward and helping us. So this whole initiative, and where I find myself, is actually to say, how can we help both sides, private sector and government, to be aware and to combine efforts to make it better for all.
Mr. Mayor, just perhaps as we wrap up this interview, the policy area, when you talk issues such as expropriation of land, that is often seen as a scarecrow for investors. The presidential panel, for example, releasing its report at the weekend on land expropriation without compensation. How much of a concern are policy areas such as that? Perhaps you also look at the whole talk around the nationalization of the Reserve Bank. Are investors concerned, and will they likely be spooked by these kind of talk?
You know, I think sometimes the messages that are coming out create concern, undoubtedly so. But at the same time, I think it's also important for us who analyze the situation on an ongoing basis to bring out messages that can actually calm the general concerns, but also bring about the balance. Let's look at the case of land, for instance. We've always said that there are two imperatives, undoubtedly, that we have to address as far as land is concerned. On the one side, land reform has to happen. It's an imperative according to the Constitution. On the other side, productive land has to be used in order to produce not only food, but also to make it commercially in the interest of South Africa to grow agricultural sector. And those two factors have to be balanced out. And I think from what I've sensed is this panel report that was published yesterday to a large extent address both those concerns. It's a matter now of making it practically implementable. And in the discussion that I had with the Minister of Agriculture 2 weeks ago, I came away with a very clear message from her that she is going to ensure that this balance be addressed in the best interest of South Africa. In other words, grow the economy through agriculture, increase our export capacity as far as a variety of agricultural commodities are concerned, and on the other side, ensure that land reform takes place, because it's been left behind for the last 25 years.
And I'm sure that Cyril Ramaphosa really drawing a line in the sand this weekend, trying to make sure that he is untouchable next year. I'm sure that will help business to a certain degree. What can be taken from that that will help inject more enthusiasm into the investment scene?
I would say there is an expectation of the President to give a stronger position as far as his own party support is concerned. In other words, to ensure that he creates a basis from where he can act without looking over his shoulder all the time. And we will have to see what comes out of this NEC meeting. I believe there is going to be a press release by tomorrow, and we will have to see what comes out of that. But I think the general inclination is of support from the private sector side, support for the President, but he has to ensure that he also stays there and do what is necessary over the next 4 years or so while he's in office.
What happens, Mr. Mayor, if the President, as talk is gaining momentum right now, particularly as we head to the NGC, the National General Council of the party next year? That's the midterm conference of the ANC. What happens with the continued talk that the President's status within the party might become more and more tenuous? Is that likely to unsettle investors?
It's difficult to say whether that is actually the message that comes out. I think, like I said, we have to see what comes out of the meeting by tomorrow when press announcements to be made. Hopefully clarify some of the issues, clarifying the position of the Secretary General and how he's going to toe the line, because the President is in charge of the party, the President is in charge of government, and that is what investors, I think, would expect. In other words, that the President takes the lead and be able to go ahead on an unhindered basis by his own party members.
That was Rolf Meyer, one of the partners in the public-private growth initiatives. Now, the special focus on personal finances and economic growth in the country continues here on ENCA throughout the day, Jane.
Yes, it does, Boy.